panel. So without further ado, I invite Tony Fraser to the stage.
Thanks, Margaret, for the kind introduction. Now, can I acknowledge, please, the traditional owners on the land in which we meet, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Look, thanks all for joining us. A really diverse group, genuinely interested in a great story. It's a story that Chris has put together. Unlike most of our military, it's void of acronyms, and it's told in a way that truly delivers the message. Kim Gillis is in Sydney, and Chris spoke to him today, and I also spoke to him today. And I'd like to acknowledge his initiative. It's quite brave for us to reach out and to do this, where we go out to publish deliberately the full story of any capability. He's built on his initiative of the Sirius story, and then the two that ASPI have done under Rob Macklin, the Air Warfare Destroyer and the Anzac frigate. From Peter Lay here, previous Chief of Army, the ASPI team, including all of the journalists that we have with us, the writers, personnel from other agencies, and there are a few of you, industry, Chris Jenkins, I acknowledge you, and Steve, the CEO of Talos, and those in defence who have joined us. And can I acknowledge Andrew Bottrell, Police General Andrew Bottrell, who looks after and commands Land Systems Division. And as Chris notes, is David Caligari here? Sorry, hiding, was coming, not seen, but like father, like son, carried the Steyr. Thank you all for your interest and your contribution in supporting what is really a remarkable story. Having been away from, and the benefit of being away from defence and returning after 7.5 years, is that you reflect on some of the stories, in particular where we were 10 years ago, where we were quite rightly criticised for the equipment that was not to the standard that our soldiers deserved nor expected. It was a systemic issue, not about individuals. Everyone wanted to make a difference, and they all cared. And then under the then Chief of Army, Ken Gillespie, with guidance from him, and John Caligari, with Jason Blaine for the implementation, we set the conditions for them to succeed. We listened, we tested, researched and improved. And now the Australian soldier is amongst the best equipped in the world. The digger work success that Chris comments on in the book is truly significant. Similarly, the enhanced Steyr is exceptional, and Chris will shortly tell his story. Can I also reflect that as we sit here tonight, wonderful Canberra day, unusual, we've broken into what is almost truly summer, that we still have 2,400 Australian soldiers, sailors and Air Force personnel deployed. Each one of them carry a Steyr. Each one of them depend on their Steyr. And indeed it is the rifle, a rifle, that unites globally as the piece of equipment for every individual in every defence force. And it was this that Chris Masters has ventured his way into, braved the world of many views, for that many people to have that many views on that many weapons, and using his ethos and values and his honed experience in what is our profession, he has magnificently crafted something for us all. Can I ask you to make welcome, please, Chris Masters.
Thank you very much, Tony. I want to first of all pay credit to an excellent idea in the very commissioning of these ASPI case studies on defence projects. I think we see too often reasoned debate about important acquisitions and development projects hijacked because of an angry deadline, more than likely planted by a disgruntled competitor. And in the digital age, as we are more often obliged to become our own information gatekeepers, we really have to find the time to do our own research. Some would have it that what is drawn from the internet is gospel and that complex ideas can be adequately explained in 140 characters, but not me. Comprehension requires commitment, now more so than ever. So, all through my career, I've watched the national attention span shrink, but as far as I'm concerned, you need a few more pages than an executive summary. What we have here is 30,000 words and 87 pages, so not too difficult to read. And Kim Gillis was talking to me this morning, and he said that he thought it would hopefully be a valuable tool for the future. I can't pretend it was easy, and as Tony was saying, you know, when the subject is a personal weapon, rationale gets right down the back of the bus. I say it in my opening paragraph. You just have to look at the United States to know what I'm talking about. Gun debate can clamour like an angry mob, with noise and passion surging at the forward edge while reason and logic shrink to the rear. This may in part explain the polarity of opinion on Australia's service rifle, the AuSteyr. And as you may have suspected, I can't claim particular expertise in the field of firearms. While I was given some, you know, people ask me, did I ever fire the weapon? Well, yes, I did. I mean, I went to Afghanistan and other places with Australian soldiers many times, so I was given sort of routine familiarisation. And from that era that I fired other weapons as well. Indeed, you know, I went out to Monagita and we fired the full suite of weapons. I think they were quite distressed when my first shot with the L1A1 hit a dead bullseye. But that was probably more to do with my own training earlier in my career. My most profound memory of a weapon was indeed the 303, which certainly dates me. And it's remarkable to think how much Australia's changed. You know, when I was a 12, 14-year-old school cadet, we used to take the 303 home. And, you know, they take the bolt out first. But can you imagine a 12-year-old kid carrying a 303 through the streets of a country town these days? And, you know, I used to think about this. For many, many, many years afterwards, I could recite the sort of 20-digit serial number of that 303. It did become part of me, like a personal weapon becomes part of many soldiers. But, you know, no fudging. I can't pretend, as I said before, that I'm any sort of expert on a weapon. I learned a lot about the Steyr, of course, but people like me are not experts on anything much at all other than researching and storytelling. And for that, I make no apology. In reporting defence issues, you know, I learned a long time ago that it was vital that we educate ourselves. Peter Lay here helped me a lot with that. You know, I had to spend a lot of time just simply learning how to speak with service personnel and to get those baffling acronyms right. It's great to be able to write a book without defence acronyms because it's almost impossible not to. And I think that, you know, I don't actually believe that you need to be in uniform to report defence matters. Indeed, there is an advantage in having perspective. When I was reporting on Afghanistan, and I was aware of some frustration within the ADF of the teams of Joint Public Affairs people that they would have there, recording all sorts of material, all sorts of cameras, lots of things were covered, but it didn't cut through. And to an outsider like myself, it was obvious why it wasn't cutting through, because what was being produced conformed to an internal narrative. I mean, defence is very good at talking to defence, but not so good at talking to the broad community. And of course, the difference with a journalist like myself, you know, there's obvious big differences, big problems in being trusted in the first place. For what it's worth, I didn't actually find it nearly the problem that people make it out to be, but of course journalists have a direct loyalty to the public, and I think there's more of a chance that when we write, it'll cut through. And this is the very circumstance that seems to me underlines the vital, honest broker role of ASPI. As an outsider, of course, there are too many difficulties accessing information. I often say, before I take on the next defence project, I'm not ever going to take on another defence project because I'm sick of people not answering the phone, and I'm sick of, you know, not being allowed access to benign and hardly sensitive information. But but there are too many times when it was just too difficult to get even historic information declassified. But I'll save my whinging because journalists are used to such difficulties. It's one of the good things we do. I mean, I learned essentially my early journalism working in country towns where you wake up in the morning and nothing's happened. You think, holy hell, what am I going to do today? You know, so you get out there and you dig, and then you wake up the next morning and nothing's happened again, you know. So it really taught me a lot, and this is what happens to all of us. We're confronted with a big subject, we've got to chase it down. You can't call for the files, there's nothing there, you just have to go out there and look for yourself. And in doing so, I think we become better in touch with primary evidence. Of course, somewhere further down the track we'll be criticised for being reckless and shoddy, but first draft history is going to be like that. In the end, despite not being able to call for the files and look through the history of how the Steyr and its various iterations came into being, I genuinely felt that the disadvantage of being an outsider turned into an advantage because it brought to the surface those investigative journalistic skills that go directly to evidence. You know, if I was trying to find out whether there were UDs in Iraq, then, you know, and I couldn't get hold of the information, I think, well, who went to Iraq? Who can I call? You know, and as a result, I think I managed over time to get a more rounded picture. My approach was honest. I had no preconceptions, I had no prejudices, and there are lots of stakeholders in this industry who are just filled with prejudice. So the approach to forming a complex and at times competing narrative was to allow the evidence to speak for itself. The process was, as I say, engaged without bias or preconception. And though I know many people for whom I have a great deal of respect would not agree with my findings even now, I ended up absolutely finding for the Steyr. And the words of Peter Leahy, former Chief of Army, resonated all through that process. You know, Peter said to me when I first asked him about it, he said, look, it's a good weapon with a bad reputation. And I thought that was a perfect descriptor of everything that I came across. As I tracked through the evidence, I came to agree with Peter. And for these basic reasons. One, compared to other nations' primary weapons, it stands tall. You know, much better than the British weapon, much better than the French weapon. The record on operations, which should really matter, shouldn't it? You know, is actually exemplary. Interestingly, I had a conversation recently with one of the historians at the War Memorial engaged in writing the Iraq-Afghanistan story. And as an aside, I asked him how much the Steyr had come up. And he said, oh, never. You know, so I mean, isn't that telling? Soldiers are pretty good at complaining about things not going right. And if they hadn't prioritised that complaint, it was quite telling. You know, it's easy to use, it's accurate, it's reliable across a range of functionality. You know, not every soldier is a Special Forces soldier that needs a Special Forces weapon. Sovereign industrial capability, critical, you know, the manufacture, the sustainment of key weapons systems is something that we've believed in for most of a century now. But, you know, it's not something an average 20-year-old digger is going to think a lot about, but yet it's vital. I say towards the end of the book that the ubiquitous M4 comparison, you know, came up a lot in the course. People automatically compared the Steyr to the M4. For those of you who don't know, the M4 is the primary weapon of our Special Forces soldiers, and a lot of soldiers want to do what the SF guys do. You know, the presumption was always that the M4 was better. and its predecessor, the M16, better than the original Steyr, the F88. So again, you go to the evidence. I went to Senior Engineering Manager Darren Christopher, a great Australian in my view. You know, not our best service personnel don't necessarily wear a uniform either. Darren is a reservist warrant officer, really cares about this subject, puts his heart and soul into it. He pulled out the files from the original trials, and I'll read you what he said. He said that he looked up the test results and he found that the Steyr AUG and the M16 were equal in 21 of the 56 different requirement categories. The M16A2 was better than the AUG in 5. The AUG, the Steyr, bettered the M16 in 29. The AUG failed in 2 and the M16 failed in 15. There was one requirement category in which both failed. But you can talk to very experienced soldiers, even from the Special Forces community now, and they will tell you confidently that the reason that we didn't adopt the M16 is because we couldn't get the licensing sorted out in time, so we got stuck with this Austrian weapon. It's just absolutely untrue. The Steyr actually won that trial fair and square. More recently, post-Afghanistan, when the argument resurfaced for replacing the Steyr with an off-the-shelf M4, Darren Christopher again looked up the evidence, and I'll take you to what he found. You know, as I say, a common refrain through the ranks in Australia was, why not get the M4? It works and it's a lot cheaper. Why not just simply buy it off the shelf in the United States? As I say, but unfortunately it's not that simple. Given that a weapon system can't be replaced every year, it needed to have a shelf life that it would at least meet medium-term requirements, and given that since Federation, governments of all persuasion required that the rifle be Australian-made, a brand new weapon would add significant manufacturing costs. Quote Darren, to introduce a new weapon system is always more expensive than it is to upgrade an existing one. In some way, shape and form, because we have had to buy more spares, more gauges, more tools and the rest, all the options that were proffered up as being potential solutions all had shorter barrels, so for the most part were less lethal. And secondly, they all pretty much fired the same sort of bullet. I think a great moment in this story is that period that was referred to, you know, from 2010 onwards, when everybody stuck their head together and said, let's solve this problem. And Tallis stepped up, and everybody else, CASG stepped up. They worked together. There'd been a history of a lot of friction and competition between the key partners, but that's when, you know, a superb weapon emerged. The evolution of the Steyr, the F88 to the EF88 is a fascinating story, which I hope I've done some justice. And what I was able to do as an independent journalist was step outside those various silos and talk to everyone. The fitters on the floor, the diggers on the range, the boffins back at base, and much more. The essence of the brief as presented to me by Peter Jennings and Kim Gillis, Tony Fraser, was to make this a good read that is worthy of your investment. So finally, my appreciation to all who helped, Michael Shoebridge, Peter Jennings, Larissa Joseph, and fellow authors Brendan Nicholson and Rob Macklin. Thank you all.